donc moi je suis Augustin Decré, je suis le directeur général Europe du Sud d'Index Exchange. Et aujourd'hui, on va parler de la transparence dans notre secteur d'activité, et plus particulièrement dans la data. Et c'est Benjamin Dick qui parlera des standards qu'on souhaite mettre en place. Rapidement, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas Index Exchange c'est le premier ad exchange indépendant au monde. C'est une entreprise canadienne qui a été créée il y a un peu plus de 10 ans. On est présent partout dans le monde. On a 500 personnes qui sont réparties à travers 11 pays, 11 bureaux. On a un bureau à Paris parce qu'on pense que la transparence, justement, et le service doivent passer par une présence locale. Alors, pour ceux qui ne savent pas ce qu'est un ad exchange, il y en a? Non, dites oui. Bon, il y a quelques temps, je dînais avec un ami qui n'est pas dans notre secteur d'activité. Il me dit écoute, je ne comprends pas, tu me parles d'ad exchange, c'est quoi exactement un ad exchange? Et je lui dis écoute, un ad exchange, c'est très simple. C'est une plateforme automatisée d'achat et de vente de publicité digitale dans laquelle il y a des acheteurs et des bailleurs qui se mettent en relation et le tout en temps réel. Et j'allais conclure, c'est un peu comme la bourse et tout, etc. Et là, il me stoppe et il me dit mais ton truc, c'est comme Tinder, sauf que c'est pour la pub. Je dis voilà, c'est comme Tinder, mais pour la pub. C'est ça, Valérie, hein? Rapidement, parce que je fais l'introduction, on a un défi à relever dans notre industrie, c'est le défi de la confiance. Alors, on va parler de transparence, mais je crois qu'il y a vraiment un problème dans notre industrie, c'est cette confiance entre les différents acteurs de la chaîne de valeur et aussi de cette confiance qu'on a par rapport à l'internaute. On a un défi, c'est celui-ci. Et ça passera par la transparence. Il y a une phrase que j'adore, c'est qu'il n'y a pas d'amour, il n'y a que des preuves d'amour. Quelles sont les preuves d'amour qu'on peut apporter aux différents acteurs de la chaîne de valeur? Donc ça passe bien sûr par la transparence. La transparence, c'est la base d'une relation à long terme et une relation saine entre deux acteurs, quelle que soit la chaîne de valeur, que ce soit en programmatique ou ailleurs. Et ça passe aussi par la accountability, c'est la responsabilité. On doit donner des comptes, rendre des comptes à nos partenaires. Alors, un DSP par rapport à un SSP, un acheteur par rapport à un bailleur, et notre industrie par rapport aux internautes. Alors pour ça, je vais prendre deux initiatives sur la transparence pour illustrer ça. La première, c'est une initiative qui a été lancée par Index Exchange au mois de septembre qui s'appelle Client Audit Log. Le but, c'est de vous donner l'ensemble des informations liées aux enchères, que vous ayez gagné ou pas l'enchère. Alors, au niveau d'un éditeur, on va vous donner les 5 meilleures enchères. Et au niveau des acheteurs, on va vous donner l'ensemble des informations liées aux enchères. Toutes ces informations, c'est toutes les informations qui sont disponibles dans les bids. Alors c'est beaucoup d'informations, on va pousser ces informations via des API, soit sur vos dashboards que vous utilisez, Atomic, etc., mais aussi des solutions maison. La deuxième initiative, c'est une initiative de l'ADTECH. Voilà, on arrive. Vous savez, il y a 2 ans, et je pense que c'est très important de mettre l'IAB et un acteur indépendant dans cette chaîne de transparence. Il faut qu'il y ait des initiatives marché, c'est très important. La première qui a été mise en place pour le programmatique, c'est le ad.txt qui garantissait une sorte de transparence. Je ne sais plus qui m'a dit ça, je crois que c'est Louis de chez Index qui me disait, voilà, on va pouvoir vous garantir que le sac Vuitton que vous avez acheté, eh bien que le magasin avait le droit de vendre ce sac Vuitton. C'est exactement ça. Garantir que l'ADTECH, l'entreprise technologique, pouvait vendre cet inventaire. On est allé plus loin aujourd'hui, depuis cet été, avec le Seller JSON et le Supply Chain Object. Bonjour. Il faut que vous vous présentiez maintenant. Merci, Edouard. On est allé plus loin puisque maintenant on va demander aux ad exchange et aux CSP de prouver qu'effectivement ils peuvent aussi travailler avec, de lister les éditeurs et les partenaires avec lesquels ils travaillent. Donc une transparence dans les deux sens. Et le dernier point, c'est S-Chain qui permet de garantir, de donner l'historique et de montrer quels sont l'ensemble des acteurs impliqués dans les bids. Alors, je vais donner la parole à Benjamin Dick, qui va nous parler de la transparence dans la data et des outils qu'on met en place pour garantir cette transparence. Merci.
Thank you so much, Augustin. Much appreciated. I'm just going to grab the clicker here. Hello, everyone. I apologize to have to switch into English. Hopefully, it's not too much of a whiplash for you. As Augustin mentioned, my name is Ben Dick, and I'm the Director of Product at IAB Tech Lab. And I look after a lot of our transparency-related initiatives, specifically the data transparency standard that I'll be talking about in more detail. Really great to have the support of Index Exchange and Augustin's team around all of our transparency efforts more broadly. This is something that's relatively recent that we're trying to build kind of education and awareness around. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the elements of the standard are, dig into some of the requirements of the standard, and then open it up to you guys for questions as I go along. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand and kind of chime in if there's anything that's unclear. Earlier this summer, at the end of June, we released a set of minimum disclosure requirements, in essence, for anyone selling data. And it outlines baseline information about where the data came from, how old it is, refresh segmentation criteria, all of the kind of bare bones quality determinants that a buyer might need to know to make it an informed decision about any given data set, largely for audience addressability reasons. So this is targeted at the syndicated marketplace mostly. So 75 companies were involved in this process. It's pretty well-rounded kind of across the ecosystem. There's three components. There's a set of requirements themselves and how to format those fields. There is something that's brand new called the Audience Taxonomy 1.0. It's a way of standardizing the labeling for audience segments in general. Somewhat like how we have a content taxonomy that most people are familiar with right now. This simply defines the type of audience as opposed to the type of content. And I'll talk about why that's part of this release in just a moment. And we also developed a whole compliance program around this as well, whereby an auditor would go and sit with any given company who wants to go through this process and determine that they are in fact completing the label accurately. And I'll talk a little bit about the components of the compliance program in just a minute. So the problem here is probably obvious to most people. Right now, most buyers are looking at a marketplace where they have a name of a segment, an ID count associated with that segment, and a price. So auto intender, $3.50, and ultimately they don't have any information about where that data came from, right? So the label itself digs into, again, minimum requirements from the perspective of the working group. And they are, data provenance, again, where was the data sourced, the age of the data, meaning how long ago was the data collected and compiled and refreshed, the modeling of the data, the extent to which it was manipulated before or after it was assigned to an online identifier, segmentation criteria, the qualifying business rules for an attribute to be assigned to any ID. So why are you an auto intender? Is it because you physically went to a car dealership in the last week, or did you just read an article? So outlines a lot of information that a buyer might want to know to make a more informed decision. And then lastly, this taxonomy. So that was a kind of a core requirement from our perspective because ultimately the name of a segment is completely different depending on the provider of that segment. So data provider A could call an auto intender segment auto intender. And then data provider B could have the same exact segmentation criteria, same exact sourcing details, but call that in market for cars, right? So when you think about the lack of ability to compare one versus another, just given different naming conventions, it creates a lot of problems when it comes to comparing like segments, right? Which we wanted to try to address. So ultimately, again, we created a set of minimum disclosure requirements to basically attack the first four areas. The audience taxonomy was intended to address that last component, the comparability aspect. And then the compliance program is, in essence, a way of supporting the first two options to provide credibility to the standard, as well as the audience taxonomy more broadly. So you can think of what we did here as akin to a nutrition label on a piece of food or a box of cereal or something. It shows you the carbohydrates, the proteins, the sugar in that box, but it doesn't necessarily tell you if that box tastes good or it tastes bad. It just gives you the information that you might need to know in order to make an informed decision about whether or not it tastes good or if it's good for you, et cetera, right? And that's an important kind of thing to keep in mind as we think about like the scope of this project. We're not getting into quality determinations or efficacy determinations. We're just simply talking about what is transparent and what is not, right? There was a number of kind of first round adopters that we announced when we released the program earlier this summer, listed here. But most of the major data marketplaces and large data providers were involved in actually crafting this, given that they themselves have a vested interest in making sure that buyers understand why they're good data providers, right? And ultimately, they're the ones who have the expertise in how all of the sausage gets made in the first place. So we're really excited to have a lot of support right out of the gate from these guys and many others who have signed up since launch. Some of you are in the room right now. I mentioned this briefly, but the scope is something of the project, and the standard more broadly is something that's very important to keep in mind. We're not saying a provider is good or bad. We're just saying that here's what you need to disclose to a buyer to allow that buyer to make an informed decision about the data. And we're not talking about quality. We're not talking about efficacy by any means. Ultimately, what we want to do is to make sure that a buyer has confidence, though, in the contents of that label. It's all self-declared by a data provider. And so the contents can be subject to a lot of manipulation, right? And so you have the choice of adopting the standard today, right now. You also have the option of adopting the standard and going through this compliance program that says that basically you get a seal of approval from the tech lab at the end of it after you complete it. It says that you can basically trust the contents of the standard. So the compliance program digs into the extent to which you're actually filling out the label properly. If there's any kind of dissonance between fields, that's number one right here. And are you formatting the information correctly? The second area that the auditors look at is people in process, meaning like, do you have the right types of people, the right organizational structure, the right documented processes in place to be able to complete these labels at scale across all of your different data segments? And then lastly, to the extent that it informs the contents of the label, do you have the right technical capabilities and platforms behind the scenes to do this in a meaningful way? And the technical capabilities really come into play when we're talking about compilation granularity, meaning are you assigning this attribute to a person, a household, et cetera? Or do you have those match tables in-house yourself? Are you outsourcing that to an external party? Those are the things that the auditors will look at and confirm on behalf of buyers. So where will these labels live? All of the marketplaces that I mentioned on the first screen, they're going to be adopting this standard and will be housed within their UIs. They're working on that and is on their 2020 roadmap right now. So basically, your data marketplace of choice should support this in the near future. There's also going to be a designated repository of labels at this URL that we built, this destination URL called datalabel.org, which is also where you can go to sign up for the compliance program or get more information about the standard itself. But in essence, this is the same information that exists in the data marketplace is fed via API that allows us to actually have line of sight into how data providers, after they go through the compliance program, are living up to their responsibility to complete these labels in a meaningful way. It provides us with an ability to keep them accountable after we give them that seal of approval, so to speak. But it's also a cool discovery tool for any tech lab member who wants to go browse the segments that have actually gone through compliance. In essence, we want this to be just a discovery and search tool. We don't want to replace the functionality of any data marketplace. So you can't push data from datalabel.org to your marketplace of choice or your activation platform of choice. We just want this to provide a way for us to actually deliver the compliance program in a meaningful way. Mentioned this briefly, but in essence, all of the information that lives in datalabel.org is fed via API via participating marketplaces. It's something that we crowdsource across a number of different vendors and is available right now if you guys are interested in building against it. And again, datalabel.org is where you go to learn more about the standard, to sign up to adopt it, or sign up for the compliance program. And ultimately, the end game here is multifaceted. We obviously want to provide transparency to buyers, but the downstream effects, I think, will be significant. Hey, guys. There's a bunch of seats over here if you're interested. We had in mind the concept of standardizing the language around which people talk about data. And we want people to use that language, that consistent way of discussing these concepts to make better decisions. And it's actually it was quite funny trying to get to this set of language that we have now. And within the working groups, people would often be arguing for the same thing, but using different language to talk about it. And they didn't realize they were agreeing with each other. And in essence, by simply standardizing the words and the definitions of those words, will provide a meaningful platform upon which to actually start having better conversations about data in general. So that's a downstream effect of the standard we hope will come to fruition. We also want good, rigorous data providers to benefit financially from this standard. There's a lot of commoditization right now in the marketplace that we're trying to address. And we think that this provides a foundation to command better prices for those who can actually prove ROI. Obviously, the more transparent, the more bias scrutiny, the better data decisions get made. That ultimately should result in more efficient and effective ad campaigns and better user experiences, and ultimately better monetization opportunities for publishers as well. Those are kind of further down the line after adoption, but we do think that this will have repercussions kind of across the ecosystem if we do get to a point where it's scaled and it's actually being used by buyers. So again, we want you guys to start asking if you're a buyer. We want you to start asking questions of your DSPs and of your marketplaces around adoption. And if you are a data provider, we want you guys to start adopting this ASAP at no cost if you want to. And if you want to go through the compliance program, just go to datalabel.org and we can give you more information about what that entails. That said, happy to take questions now, or I can do them at the end after I actually get through what's in the standard. Do you guys have a preference one way or the other? Any top line questions now? Happy to address and then get into this. Makes sense so far? Okay, cool, getting some nods. Okay, so the standard itself is up to 20 fields of metadata that would be assigned to any given segment. The summary area or summary section starts with very basic things like what is the name of the company that is providing the data, which is provided today. The contact information associated with that provider if a buyer has questions or has follow-up information they want to go through. The name of the segments, again, something that's provided today. The standardized segment name, that's the field where they would ingest the audience taxonomy standard name, right? So that, in essence, you can compare like segments across different vendors. For those who entered the room, we created a whole new taxonomy. It's called the Audience Taxonomy 1.0, and that's where that standardized name would go. And then the next field is going to be segmentation criteria, and that's probably the most important field in the entire standard itself. This is the kind of free-form area where you describe the rules that govern the inclusion of an attribute in any given segment. So things like where, the provenance, the recency, segmentation rules in general. That's where a data provider would have an opportunity to get into all of those details. But ultimately, the compliance program will make sure that that information is not salesy jargon. It's actually hard rules that apply to the actual business criteria that go into the segment itself, the segmentation. Closing out the last few pieces here, audience precision level refers to the extent to which that attribute is assigned to a person, a household, a business, et cetera. And then ID count and ID types. ID count is just the number of IDs in a segment. Again, provided today. ID type refers to the types of IDs, if it's a cookie ID, a mobile ID, or a platform ID. And that obviously will inform how that segment can be used and across which kind of environments, whether it's browsers, whether it's on mobile apps, whether it's on the provider's platform, walled garden platform. Geography, again, pretty straightforward. That is the area of coverage of the segment, and usually also refers to where the data was collected to begin with. And then privacy policy. It's simply a link to the seller's privacy policy in general. And this was the biggest area of contention probably within the label. We wanted to get a whole lot more granular in terms of opt-in, opt-out, the extent to which local laws were actually followed. But unfortunately, when we were creating this thing, we didn't know exactly what those local laws would look like. We knew about GDPR, we knew about CCPA, but we didn't know exactly how that would kind of transpire across the globe, and this is in essence a global standard. So for now, we're just listing the privacy policy, but we definitely have intentions over the next few years to evolve this pretty dramatically in 1.1, 1.2, 2.0. That's the area of most change probably in future versions. So. All right, audience details. Actually, how am I doing on time? Are we good? Should I speed this up? Yes, we can. Okay. Audience details get into data sources. So origin of the raw data that's used to compile the segment. Select all that apply. Data inclusion methodology, meaning the relationship of the seller to the attribute. Did that seller observe it directly? Did they see that person walk into the car dealership? Is it based on declared information? Did that person who walked in the car dealership tell the seller that they walked into the car dealership, or did they observe it directly, right? Derived is basically whether or not the seller used some kind of computer or algorithm to determine the attribute in general. Inferred is the kind of similar to derived, but in essence, they use some kind of business rules or logic to assign the attribute to the identifier. And modeled, that basically refers to look-like modeling. Was some seed used to train a model to find IDs that look like that seed pool? Audience expansion just refers to whether or not modeled was selected. Cross-device expansion refers yes or no, refers to whether or not IDs were included in that segment because they look like, or they think they're associated with devices or computers within the seed set. Audience refresh cadence simply refers to how frequently the IDs are added or removed from a segment. And then source lookback window is the period in the past that a data provider is looking to qualify an attribute to begin with. Is it a week, a month, a year? How far in the past are they going to actually determine that you're an auto intender to begin with? And then lastly, onboard details. This only applies if the attribute was collected offline first based on census records or survey information, and then that attribute was then assigned to an online identifier. So the most important field here, I'm gonna pause after this to answer any questions because I think I'm running short on time. The most important field here is match key. What is that field, which are the fields that were actually used to make the offline to online association? Is it an email and an address? Is it an email and a postal code? Are you simply matching based on cookie IDs, right, at the end of the day? Are you using a phone number? Select all that apply, basically. In essence, the implication here is the more fields that are selected within this area, the better. The better association, presumably, between the offline attribute and the online identifier. So that was a lot of information. Apologies for running through that very quickly.